No child should be disadvantaged by unfair admissions practice and criteria, and every parent should know the basis on which their child will be admitted to a school. That's what the government wants, but what does it mean, and can it work? In our studio, a distinguished panel and expert audience composed of parents, teachers and educational professionals. Our topic is selection in schools. But selection means different things to different people in different contexts. At its heart is choice, choosing the pupils and choosing the school. But who is choosing whom? That's our big debate. Hello. The issue of selection in secondary education has been one of the boldest and bloodiest fights in modern political and educational history. The old Labour Party wanted non-selective comprehensive schools and the eradication of grammar schools and secondary moderns. As Labour leader, Tony Blair's mantra was education, education, education. And since 1997, the new Labour government has wrestled, refined and redefine the system. They introduced new sorts of schools, claiming they extended parental choice while giving more schools self-governing powers. Apart from the surviving grammar schools, selection on ability was supposedly outlawed. However, increased choice has meant that popular schools have to limit their intake, and this, coupled with more schools becoming self-governing, gives rise to the accusation that some sort of selection, either overt or covert, still survives. Faith schools, foundation schools, specialist schools and academies only add to a mix which critics see as increasingly complex and surreptitiously unfair. Parents who have the insight or arguably the income to work the state system stand accused of having an unfair advantage. And while no political party is calling for more grammar schools, none has pledged to remove all those that still exist. For politicians and educational administrators, selection by the school is the subject which dare not speak its name. But where do we go from here?
I recognise that it would be a retrograde step for my party to spend the next few years of opposition and perhaps after that years of government fighting to try to bring back the 11+ and academic selection into our schools. That is not what David Cameron nor I intend.
If you've got a school that is oversubscribed, where there's a very high demand for places, they've got more demand than they've got places, then there's a natural tendency over the years for them to move into areas where they're selecting the children who are easiest to teach.
In the education bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, we are introducing a much tougher new admissions code, which all admissions authorities must act in accordance with, rather than, as is the case at the moment, act with regard to. And that will remove some of the backdoor selection methods.
The government's new education bill is now on its way through the House of Lords. But I think it'd be a good idea to start at the beginning with our apparent terror at the very concept of selection. What are we afraid of? What's wrong with it? Fiona Miller, you are deeply opposed to the idea of selection on the basis of ability. Why?
Well, I think it's anti-choice for a start, because the school is doing the choosing. It means that children start their secondary schools very often feeling like failures, and selective schools denude other schools in that area of a critical mass of more able pupils that we all know they need to perform well.
Chris Woodhead, you have almost the exactly opposite view.
I do. That is true. I have no terror at the notion of selection. I think we should recognise that children do differ in terms of their abilities and their aspirations, and it makes sense to send them to schools that are dedicated to the fulfilment of their particular potential. I think it's a tragedy that the grammar school, which is the most efficient vehicle for social mobility we've ever had, has largely been abolished. And
so the selection of pupils by schools is desirable, not undesirable, the exact obverse of the government's own strategy.
It's it's desirable, obverse of current strategy, and Conservative strategy as well.
Pauline Perry, you shook your head at that.
There is no way that the Conservative Party is going to go back to selection. That is just absolutely ruled out. But I think what we certainly would like to see is the increase of parental choice. So there is far more both diversity in schools, which the government has begun to do, and we like that, but also much more opportunity for parents to have a genuinely wide choice, not just their local school.
Canon Hall, as a man of the cloth, or you haven't got it around your neck at the moment, but also as an educator, what is your view in principle about selecting pupils by their ability?
Well, there is a small number of Church of England schools, so we aren't entirely against that, but nevertheless don't want to see any extension of selection by ability. What we're very keen on is parents being able to select the sort of school that suits them and their children.
OK, I'm going to bring you in a moment, Anne Westblow. I just want to go to push this forward a bit. Selection poses a dilemma, and of course it goes to the very heart of education policy. The government says it's given parents more choice. So, to coincide with this programme, Teachers TV commissioned a poll. We asked 800 parents, do you think there was a genuine choice for your child's school allocation? Now, while 70% thought there was such a choice, 29%, that's getting on towards a third, said no. Anne West, if a school is oversubscribed, then it's extremely difficult to deliver parent choice, is it not?
It is very difficult, and that is why schools have oversubscription criteria. And these come into play when there are more applicants than there are places available. And these are meant to be objective, clear and fair. And these are meant to give parents a good indication as to whether or not their child stands a chance of getting a place at their preferred school.
And that takes us, of course, to the new code that the government is introducing, which gives instructions and recommendations which we need to touch on, which are quite complicated. The government's solution to the worries about selection has been, they claim, to toughen up the existing schools admission code, which instructs schools, as I was just saying, on what they can and what they can't do in organising their admission systems. Has it solved the problem? Fiona Miller, I want to come back to you on this. There are guidelines, there are instructions, there are adjudicators, there are forums. Does it work? Can it work?
Well, we don't know yet how the new code will work in practice, and it is a great deal better than the old one. But I think there is still a concern about how, if you have a lot of more schools who can control their own admissions, which is what's proposed in the new bill, how the management of that process for any given area will be enforced, either by the local authority or by the admissions forum, who will have the responsibility for enforcing it, and also that schools will have to report other schools who aren't complying with the code. I mean, it feels to me very loose. And yet you wanted this.
You wanted a very tough code yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it could go further. Chris Woodhead, can it in principle, given that you don't like it, can it in principle work in a way that if you take the view that it's unfair to have schools selecting and fair to allow parents to choose as much as possible, can it in that context actually work?
No, however tough it is, it won't work if demand exceeds supply. I mean, the essential problem is that there aren't enough good schools, so that the good schools get oversubscribed. Too many parents want to send their children to them. That's the essence of the problem.
But you, Baroness Perry, rather support the code. You have debate about it. You've discussed it as your party. I know that you're an advisor to your party, not your leader. Do you think it can work fairly if it's operated effectively?
We haven't said that we supported the code. We've said that we supported the principle in the bill of giving some schools more freedom.
Are you against the code? Or don't you know yet?
It's far too detailed and far too complicated and complex. I think that, I mean, as I come back to, what we really want is for every school to have the freedom that is only given to a small number of schools now. I mean, I bitterly resent the way that we are creating a two-tier system in which you have good schools, popular schools, that turn into academies or foundation schools or whatever, and have a lot of power to select and a lot of autonomy in their selection, and other schools which are restricted by this very heavy code. We'll
come on to that in a bit more detail in a while, but let's ask some of our people who are directly involved at the coalface, as it were, here, how it's going to work. You're the director, Tim Bartlett, at the Centre of Study of Comprehensives. Do you reckon that schools will be able to cope with it? We've heard already how complicated it is, whether it's approved of or not, as a principle.
Well, the existing admissions arrangements are extremely complex. I haven't got any doubt that schools will be able to manage them. The difficulty is going to be whether parents can. Bev
Feather, you are a primary school head. Your school's oversubscribed?
Very, yes.
Very oversubscribed. How do you reckon you will be able to manage this code in a way that is fair?
The code is only doing what we've already been doing before. Our criteria have always been looked after children, children with statements first, and then siblings, and then proximity. We have no choice at all.
Sir Michael Wilshaw, you are the head of one of these new academies. Can you manage the new code effectively?
We fully subscribe to the admissions code for my local authority. As one of my colleagues said, we have to take our fair share of children with special needs. We have to take siblings. We have to take those children in care of the local education authority before the admissions criteria kicks in. And we ensure a balanced intake by banding children into four ability
of those children
groups.
who apply to the school, you say, we want so many of this ability, so many of that ability, so many of that
to ensure
ability.
a good comprehensive intake.
And using the existing measures that there are of primary school children to achieve that.
That's right. And we also provide them with a cognitive ability test to refine it even further.
You get, jolly short, you get the best ones, as many of the best ones as you want in order to come out well in the
No,
gradings?
absolutely not. We take 25% in the top ability range, then the B band, and what we call the B band gets the next 25%. And as I say, we take more than our fair share of children with special educational needs.
Ingrid Sutherland, you study this very closely. Let me put to you the proposition that if there are not enough good schools, so you've got, as it were, too many parents and pupils chasing too few schools, it's hard to say that parents under those circumstances have real choice.
Well, we find from the calls we receive in our advice line from parents that they don't believe they do have a choice. They believe that schools have a choice. And I think the more so-called choice and different schools that are established, the harder it's going to be for parents. I think parents find it very difficult because it's almost impossible to understand. There are lots of different schools that have different criteria. It's just a completely impossible muddle for parents to understand, and even parents who are well educated, who may be able to use the system to suit them, don't understand it.
Well, any teacher prepared to come back in on that? Because there's a complete mismatch between what, from what we've just heard, parents have said, rather complacent view from you that, oh yes, it works terrifically well, and the view that she's getting from parents, which is an absolute dog's breakfast and we don't like it.
I do myself spend a lot of time counselling parents, both parents of 4-year-olds and parents of 10-year-olds getting ready to make secondary choice. It's as though their brains have become clouded by all the information they get. There's a lot of misinformation circulating.
Let me move on to one aspect of this with you, Tim Bartlett, again, if I could. The code makes it very clear that schools are not allowed to, quote, interview pupils, but governors and schools are encouraged to meet pupils at open days and on other occasions, so long as what they discover there plays no part at all in the decision that they make about who does or doesn't get into the school. Can we ask parents to believe that that can operate effectively?
We can ask them, can't we? And also you have to imagine that you would rarely get 100% of potential parents able, willing and wanting to attend an open day. So even that, that example is exactly the sort of thing which in the end, whatever one's intention, can have the unintended consequence of saying that we as a school don't welcome certain groups.
Ingrid, do you think that you can have this, as it were, Chinese wall between the non-interview and the informal meeting, and that the school somehow, when it's pressurised to deliver results, won't say to itself one way or another, I quite liked that child and that family?
I don't think that's a major problem. I do think open evenings and that is much more about pupils and families going and looking at a school, which is a very positive move. I don't think that's the problem. It's more where part of your criterion is not objective, and that's when there is much more selection by schools rather than choice of parents.
Ken Hall, you wanted in on that?
Well, I think it's easy to be cynical about these processes. It's very important indeed for parents to be able to visit the school and to see what the school is like and to discover themselves whether they actually want their children to go there. And I'm sure that those who are involved in meeting parents aren't actually not making a list of the people they want to admit. There's different people, certainly as far as church schools are concerned, who are involved in making those decisions.
Chris Woodhead on this.
Well, I would simply say, why shouldn't the school admit the children that it wants to admit? A school is determined by its intake. Schools should have the freedom to choose the children that they want. The problem, to repeat, is that there aren't enough good schools, so that the schools that are popular are oversubscribed.
So, Michael, why shouldn't you be free to choose, as Chris Woodhead would like you to be?
Well, because I'm a passionate believer that comprehensive education works, and I'm only interested in running an all-ability school. And if it's a good school, then it can get youngsters into university, and it can also meet the needs of children who can barely read and write. I've worked in a system where selection took place, and youngsters who didn't pass 11+ were consigned to a particular type of school and saw themselves as failures.
Chris Woodhead?
Well, that's fine. I mean, you choose the identity of your school, and I'm all for you having the freedom to do that. But if other head teachers want to run a different sort of school, why shouldn't they have the freedom to do that?
Fiona Miller, you both represent parents' interests as part of your professional life, and also you care passionately about the comprehensive system. How do you get as well what Ingrid Sutherland was saying about the parents feeling completely lost? I don't want to misinterpret her. Lost and cynical about the process. It means that there is a real very big challenge to be surmounted if people are going to say, yes, this is the way ahead, if parents are to say that.
I agree with you, and when I actually try and think about what the new choice advisors who are in the bill will do in practice, I think a lot of their time will be spent persuading parents actually not to apply for the schools they want to apply for, rather than applying for the ones they don't want to apply for. Because what you hear over and over again, and I talk to primary school parents who say, I want to apply for this school, and the head will say to them, don't do it, there's no point. They'll put one school down on their application form and they'll end up with no place anywhere. So I think we have to help parents be realistic about exercising their choices. I've just got to come back on Chris's point, though, because, I mean, if some schools can select academically, then Michael can't have his all-ability school. You can't have selective schools and comprehensive schools running alongside each other.
And, of course, the reverse is true, that if every school has to be a comprehensive school, those parents that want to send their children to a selective school are denied that choice.
And there we are going to take our first pause. And then we're going to be looking at those areas where selection still does exist officially and conceivably unofficially. Join us in a moment. Welcome back. Selection still exists officially, although some don't like the term, in many schools. But does this overt selection also lead to covert selection? Let's start with academies, those privately backed schools which are introduced to replace unsuccessful schools. There are now 46 academies in existence, and the government plans to found 200 by the year 2010. Those schools can choose up to 10% of their intake according to aptitude in special subjects. I want to find out a little bit how it works. Peter Crook, you run such an academy, and you can select 10% of your pupils. How do you actually do it?
First of all, the selection of the children, when you make a choice between two of anything, you are selecting. And families can decide whether they are interested in coming to their local school, the Academy at Peckham, on the basis that the school has a specialism in the performing arts. The legislation doesn't allow, and neither should it in my view, for selection by ability in subjects such as maths and English and so on.
How can you, if the child is 11 years old, I mean, maybe you can in the arts, but how do you select between two extremely enthusiastic children and enthusiastic parents and say, this is the child who I know has an aptitude, not an ability, but an aptitude in the performing arts?
Well, you're quite right to distinguish between aptitude and ability.
I was going to ask you to tell me whether it's a distinction without a difference.
Oh, it's a distinction. No, it is a distinction, and there is a difference.
What is the difference?
The youngsters that we offer places to on the basis of their aptitude for performing arts are the youngsters for whom that is an access key to the curriculum. So that is what they're interested in. As it works out with our fair banding system, those youngsters actually apply to us as their local school. Our criteria relate to the schools of the education action zone in our area.
And you can actually make a judgment about aptitude, and you can say this is aptitude and it's not ability that this child is demonstrating.
I don't know if you watch the programmes such as Pop Idol, but one would perhaps distinguish on some acts in that sense as well.
But do you think the same principle then can, if it's the case with the performing arts, to take that example, and maybe with sport as well, but what about other subjects?
No,
science, mathematics?
No, I would defy people to take such a judgment, distinguishing between aptitude and ability in subjects such as that.
Chris Woodhead.
Well, I don't understand the distinction between aptitude and ability at all, and I'm afraid Peter hasn't cast any light on the fog that I live within. I mean, my position, as I've already said, is that schools should select on whatever grounds they want to select on, and I can't understand the nervousness that doesn't allow anybody to contemplate this position at all.
And Wes, can you help us with these schools? Peter has just said that he doesn't think it should apply outside the areas of sport you would go with, yes?
The government in the Code of Practice gives a number of subjects where this can apply.
But you don't think it should with, you don't think it should with some of those subjects?
No, I agree with the government's choice. Yeah, I do. The Code of Practice is right in that.
OK. Can you answer Chris Woodhead's problem here, Anne West, if you want to?
In terms of differentiating between ability and aptitude?
Yeah.
I don't think it's really feasible to differentiate between ability and aptitude. I think there is an issue about the extent to which aptitude or ability in performing arts is going to be related to later, for example, GCSE achievement. And I think in some subject areas there is likely to be a relationship. So, for example, technology, which is no longer going to be a subject that can be one of those that schools can select 10% of pupils on the basis of. I think that was almost certainly the case there. And I suspect with modern foreign languages it's also the case.
So does that mean that from your perspective, given that you can't make the distinction, that the idea of the Academy is giving that 10% is some kind of, what, sop or irrelevant, or do you fundamentally say, yes, I like it despite my reservations?
I think the concerns that there are that whenever you have any form of selection by ability or aptitude, you're privileging some children over others. And I think that is a problem if one wants to have a cohesive society. You're saying that you have more right to a place because you have this particular aptitude or ability, you have more right than somebody else does.
Pauline Perry?
That only applies if there are very few schools that have that particular opportunity. If we really had a diverse system in which any school, every school, could say, look, I lay out its wares. You know, we're a school that specialises in mathematics and science. We're a school that specialises in music and the arts. We're a school that specialises in literature and English and so on. Doesn't mean they don't have a good curriculum across the rest, but they're really looking for that. And then, as parents, I keep coming back to parental choice, which all the research has demonstrated is the biggest driver to improving the quality of education that we have. And parents would then really have a rich choice. And I do absolutely agree with Anne. You can't distinguish between ability and aptitude. I think, you know, children have a range of abilities, and there is no child that doesn't have some ability. And there ought to be a place for every child somewhere in a school. I hate this idea of some sort of specialist posh schools that have you know, the right to choose, you know, and very, very high standards in particular areas, and selecting bright kids and others that don't. I want all schools to be able to offer a real choice to parents.
I'll let you back in on that. You failed from their point of view to make a distinction between aptitude and ability.
Aptitude or ability, that's the question. But the interesting thing in terms of the abilities that are being talked about, really, about the 5A to Cs and so on, those are the linkage between the youngster who is applying to us, who is keen on accessing the curriculum through the performing arts, may have very low abilities in terms of their maths, their English, their science, their geography and so on. But this is actually, there's something in the middle of Peckham that is actually turning them on. That is actually the thing that would enable them to make a positive choice to come to their local school. When they're defined by cognitive abilities tests and that sort of thing, they go throughout the bands.
OK, we're going to pause on that and move on to faith schools, which, as the name suggests, obviously choose pupils from a particular religious background. Faith schools may promote individual faith, but could faith itself, the question is, become a socio-economic criterion which might indicate who are the better pupils, the stronger pupils and the weaker pupils? Canon Hall, how do you choose? Your schools, faith schools, are oversubscribed. How do you, leave aside for the moment the prospect of 25% being from other faiths or no faiths, how do you, with your oversubscribed schools, select or choose your pupils?
Well, first of all, obviously, the parents have to choose to send their children to that particular school. That's the first bit of selection that happens.
And they do, in very large numbers, which means you're oversubscribed.
And therefore, that creates a great dilemma and difficulty for the governing bodies, who have to make very difficult decisions. They don't want to turn anyone away who wants to be educated within a church school. That's obviously a very bad sign to be giving. So it is a difficult issue. The Church of England is clearly committed.
How do you resolve that difficult issue?
Well, as I say, the Church of England is clearly committed to ensuring that we're not only distinctively Christian in the education we offer, but also inclusive as far as we possibly can be. So our policy is that a proportion of places should be made available on the basis of the practice of the Christian faith, and another proportion of places made available on the basis of local priority.
But that doesn't quite answer the question. If you are oversubscribed, is it becoming, I mean, the question I put before, does it become at a certain point a lottery? If you say they all can demonstrate, they've all shown they go to church twice a week, even if, or once a fortnight, or whatever it may be. How do you do it then?
Clearly, if you did have, 100,000 people applying for 100 places and they could all demonstrate absolute commitment, then you'd have to take the ones who were living nearest the school. That's one of the ways in which schools do it at the moment. And we're certainly considering the possibility that you ought to draw some sort of line on the map and do it by lottery, because we're conscious of this house price pressure on popular schools.
Okay. I want to bring you in, Ruth Weston, as a parent, and I want to put to you, Lord Adonis, in a previous incarnation before he became minister, said securing places in popular church schools is an art form for the professional classes. I have a feeling it may have been an art form for you. Is that correct?
Yes, I suppose that could be said, yes. Our daughter went to a Roman Catholic school. We're not Roman Catholics.
How did you con your way in there, then?
Because we're Christian, and we did want particularly to have a Christian education for our daughter, or have that element within it, and we're very happy with that. And then it came to the secondary school, and we looked at the options we had in the area we lived, and that was one of the options, and it made a great deal of sense that she went in that direction. Partly it was our faith, but partly it was also about the options of the good schools available in our area as well. We didn't have a good local school. We weren't in the catchment for a good local school.
Anne West, it's inevitable, isn't it? When you've got the pressures, the faith schools, Church of England schools particularly, and Dutch Catholic schools, perform extremely well. She's not alone, Ruth, in trying to get in. We hear all sorts of tales about how people decide suddenly that they've got a very strong faith and demonstrate to their local vicar that they've been going to church regularly in order to get into the school, etc.
I do have a very strong faith.
I'm sorry, I wasn't suggesting that you didn't have a strong faith at all. I mean, this is where you get a sort of covert form of selection, don't you, inevitably?
Well, there is certainly evidence to suggest that schools' admissions criteria do enable them to select from amongst those who want to go to the school certain pupils over others. And the evidence suggests that quite a significant minority of schools that are responsible for their own admissions, which includes faith schools and foundation schools, use a range of these practices and criteria. So, for example, they are more likely than others to select a proportion of children on the basis of ability or aptitude in the subject area, or on the basis of general ability. They're more likely to give priority to certain groups of children, for example, those whose parents went to the school, or to the children of governors. They are more likely to take account of head teacher reports or on siblings' attendance and so on.
OK. Let me... we got a wry smile from Ruth at Lord Adonis's quote, Canon Hall, securing places in popular church schools is an art form for the professional classes. You would, as a man of the world as well as a man of the cloth, concede that that is not inconceivable.
Well, I think there may be some people who go along to church because they'd like to get their child into a church or in a school, and they perhaps, I hope they discover from that the joy of church going. That's a very important principle as far as we're concerned. Nevertheless, we are conscious of the fact that a lot of Church of England schools have really quite complicated admissions policies, and we have been saying and are saying and will be saying that they ought to be simpler and more easily understood. One of the things that we're quite aware of and want to counter is any suggestion at all that Church of England schools socially select or covertly select so as to have an advantaged intake. That is something that we're strongly against. The Church of England began life providing education for everyone in 1811, and that's what we intend to do.
But there is some evidence, isn't there, for some objective evidence that if you look at those areas where in the voluntary aided school catchment areas, that something, I think I've got the figures right, that something like 19% in those areas of children who are entitled to free school meals, but at church schools, Church of England schools, only 14% of those children actually attend those schools, which does select there is something going on here.
That's one way of looking at those statistics. I mean, another way of looking at it is just saying that there is, I think it's just about 1 or 2 percentage points lower in Church of England schools than the national average as far as free school meals are concerned. Certainly, if you look at particular areas, you can cut it in particular ways. But yes, we're conscious of the fact that that there is some skewing, and we're also very determined that we should offer education for all. And one of the interesting things is that as we expand our number of secondary schools, we're expanding in particular in more disadvantaged areas, and we're very delighted that that is moving forward.
Chris Waterman, you run something called the Confederation of, or involved in the Confederation of Children's Services Managers. Is this as hunky-dory as the canon is suggesting?
No, it's neither hunky nor dory, as John Hall well knows. If you look at London and you look at primary schools, where there should be no selection, on average there are 2 fewer free meal children in every church class and 1 more in every state sort of community school class. And so inevitably, if the churches select, as they do, and one of the problems, I don't think you've made the point yet in this programme, local authority schools, the local authority does the admissions. In church schools and foundation schools, it is the school that does it. And it is a secret garden. And one of the things that will hopefully be discussed before the bill sees its way through is to have independent observation of the way that church schools allocate places.
Are you prepared to buy into that?
They don't do covert selection, and the more we have, the more inclusive they'll be.
Let's go on to foundation schools. The government wants to expand the numbers of foundation schools. Foundation status allows schools a greater degree of autonomy that includes admission and selection criteria. But they will have to comply with the school's admission code as well, and those guidelines. You rather like the idea of these schools, don't you, Baroness Perry?
As I've said before, that every school should be a foundation school, or have the freedom that a foundation school has. And the code itself is very, very restrictive. I mean, it's much more articulate on what you can't select by than it is in telling you what you can select by. And I think that's what's wrong with the code. I think it's very light on explaining how schools could very positively offer something different to parents. And I think if we had every school a foundation school, I mean, it's this, as soon as you start selection in some schools, or any form of selection, then you are getting a rump of schools without selection, which then become less desirable.
Not enough autonomy, Anne West?
Well, I don't have a problem in general with autonomy, except when it comes to admissions. The stakes are very, very high now for schools to maximise their league table positions. And whilst you have schools that are responsible for their own admissions, carrying out their own admissions, there's a real concern that they will use practices that might not be objective and fair. And I think that's the big concern, as far as I'm concerned, with the growing number of, or the possible increase in numbers of foundation schools, trust schools.
Ian Wright, do you like the principle? Are you free man now that you are able to have a foundation school? And between those two competing views, where are you?
I think the new code is quite an interesting issue for specialist schools, foundation schools, and particularly schools like mine that work in selective areas. In fact, actually, it's going to work in our area against the wishes of parents, rather bizarrely, that we will find that because we have to choose the pupils blind from a list when we do not know whether the parent has put us down as a choice because we're a language college. Because we'll end up choosing blind, we will end up taking pupils who don't necessarily want our specialism, but they are closer to where our school is placed.
But does that mean that from your point of view, there's no particular advantage then in being a foundation school?
Well, I suspect we are moving in that direction. I feel it's removing our autonomy, and I think in our area that would be a sad loss to many parents. We don't select pupils. We have a very transparent system. We don't interview youngsters, but we do allow parents to choose us, and after having seen the school, and that is a key issue. The new bill will remove that parental right for some parents.
And if you are oversubscribed, to come back to what we were talking about, and you know that here is this great enthusiasm of children who want to join you because you are a language school, what do you do about that if you were given the right to choose on the basis of whether or not they were first choice or second choice or third choice?
Well, knowing that they've chosen because we're a language college and there's a good reason for them choosing our school, and that may be because a grandparent was French or German or what have you, would perhaps be something we might consider. But as it stands, we go to an independent appeals, and somebody else makes the judgment about our intake, not us as a school.
Fiona Miller, if Ian Wright is correct, then there's going to be a reluctance to go down the road that the government would like to see schools going down, more and more.
Well, I think there are two
schools.
things. There's autonomy in every other regard, you know, freedom to run your budget, to do what you want, to employ your staff in the way you want, and freedom to control admissions. And I agree with Anne there. I mean, it's one freedom too far. But I mean, as I understand it, under the combined admissions schemes now, the equal preference still tries to allocate parents to their first choice of school, and in many areas it's running much more successfully as a result of that.
Allegedly that is the case, but when you are in an area where there's more than one popular and successful school, you can end up with the bizarre situation I've just outlined, which is the wrong pupils in the wrong schools in terms of the specialism they want. We've proved it, we know it will happen.
Well, that goes back to whether or not you're going to allow schools to select by specialism, really, or whether parent choice is overriding that so that most parents can get into the school they want to get to. But, I mean, I think one thing that's coming out of this discussion is it was raised by one of the people in the audience, is about the objective nature of the criteria. If we want to be fair to parents and allow them choice, we need to give them criteria that they can understand. Yes, and somebody else isn't then looking at the applicant behind the scenes and deciding they fit with a different set of criteria that are published in the brochure, that are published in all the websites of the school, and I think that still goes on.
Now, there is an elephant in this room which we're going to move on to, which we need to identify. One major aspect of the selection debate the government seems somehow to have sidestepped. There are still 164 grammar schools in England and 69 in Northern Ireland. Fiona Miller, I'm coming back to you. Has the government just copped out of this by saying we're not going to do anything about them?
Absolutely. I mean, it's completely... The idea that all the main political parties are now against selection, but we still have a selection in, you know, almost a quarter of all education authorities, and 15 are fully selective, which incidentally does depress standards for the other schools in their area, seems to me absolutely absurd. And I hope that gets raised in the remaining stages of the bill and subsequently.
Pauline Perry, David Willetts, very start of this show, made it very clear that the Conservative Party was not going down the grammar school route. Is this a fundamental ideological shift, or are they just backing off in the face of public opinion and school opinion?
You may call it a fundamental ideological shift, as you like. I don't see it as that. I mean, I think that the Conservative Party, when it was in power, after all, created a lot of new comprehensive schools and consented to the abolition of a lot of grammar schools. I mean, we believe in the equality of the comprehensive school. As I repeat, as soon as you start giving one category of schools selection, then you are debasing all the other schools that do not have it. But I don't want to abolish selection for the ones that have it. I would like to see every school free to offer its wares and parents free to make choices in a very diverse system.
And you believe that you can have selection and parent choice?
Absolutely.
Combined?
Yeah, absolutely, provided that the selection is, as others have said, open and fair, and on the basis, as we've heard, of a particular specialism, of a particular ethos, particular interest. As long as every school has it, then you don't have the popular school and the unpopular school.
Chris Woodhead, you ring every bell, bang every drum for the grammar school. Do you concede that the argument is effectively, in real terms, now dead, however great your passion?
No, I don't. I think it's dead on the left. Of course, it's always been dead on the left. The Conservative Party is just responding to what it perceives to be the expressed wishes of the focus groups. You go to Bournemouth...
They're not popular.
What?
They're not popular.
Well, they're not popular. They're desperately oversubscribed, every grammar school in the country.
That's because if you don't go to a grammar school, you have to go to a secondary modern in a selective area. Most parents don't want to send their children to secondary modern.
So the challenge, of course, for the Conservative Party and the Labour government is to create alternatives to grammar schools for children who have got different kinds of potential. But you asked me whether I think the argument's lost. No, I don't think it's lost. I think that you've got political parties that are simply responding to perceived wishes of the electorate, pusillanimous in the extreme, no educational principles or coherent view of anything.
It may not be lost. For the moment, it is suspended because we're going to take a pause. When we return, we're going to look at the covert selection, which springs not so much from policy, but from money. Join us in a moment. Welcome back to the big debate. Let's look now at a covert form of selection, which lets parents choose the state school they want, but only if they've got the money to do it. Because, of course, once a school gets a good reputation, isn't it inevitable that parents will want to add to their chances of success by living within its immediate catchment area? The Teachers' TV poll asked parents, would you move house to an address near to your first choice of school? No less than 31% of the respondents said yes, they would do just that. But not every parent can afford to move from an area where there are bad schools to areas where there are good schools. In 1998, Lord Adonis, before becoming an education minister, wrote that, I quote, comprehensive schools have largely replaced selection by ability with selection by class and house price. And there's another twist to this. You can rent your way into the school of your choice. The Teachers' TV poll asked, would you rent a property near to your school of first choice? 19% said yes, they would. The poll also asked how many would use an alternative address to that of their family home to get their children into the right school. 14% said they would do that. So it looks as though parents really are ready to go to pretty considerable lengths to get what they want. We've got estate agents with us. Hakan Buzati, does that poll strike a chord with you from your experience?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, I've had personal experiences where people have sort of come into our office and rented properties to get their children into the school. They move into the accommodation for maybe 12 months. Once they're into the school, they're back to their existing property where they were before. If they've got the funding, if they can finance it to buy the property, then good for them. They can do it, and it does put a strain on obviously those particular roads that fall into the catchment on those schools, and it does inevitably push the prices up.
You're in North London?
Yes.
And you are in
East London.
In East London, Joseph Clement. Is the same thing happening there?
Definitely. I think we're seeing sort of hikes in prices up to 20%.
20%?
Yeah, in certain areas where the allocation is quite small, and we're finding that people rent and not even move in, leave the property empty.
I suppose that means in house terms that quotes bad areas in housing terms can become quotes good areas in housing terms.
Indeed, yes.
Either way, it's pretty good for you lot, isn't it?
Well, I feel we'd probably sell the house anyway. It wouldn't be an issue. So, but I think you do find that it does create a stigma against good roads and bad roads. So yeah, it has accelerated sort of what is regarded as a really good road now, purely because of the location of where it is towards a school that's good.
No.
And it's one of the first questions they ask now. What's local schools like?
Yeah. Hilary Wills, you are in our trade, my trade, you're a journalist, an education journalist, but you are, as they say, also a mother. You are ready to do this. Have you done it?
We did this. I mean, we moved almost 100 miles to get to the school that we thought would be right for our children. And I think, why is anyone surprised? I mean, as soon as you have choice, parents are going to want to do the best for their children. And this is never, ever going to change. And we want parents to be involved in schools, and we want children to have the support of their parents. So then, why is it considered a bad thing if parents get very involved in selection?
And are you prepared to pay quite a premium? We heard 20% increase there. Are you prepared to pay quite a premium if you have to?
Within our budget, yes. I think
and
so.
Are you making a choice there between going to a state school because you prefer to go to a state school and prepared to pay more for the house, rather than the alternative of going to a private school and staying where you lived?
That was my choice. I very much wanted my children to be in the state school system. not the private school system. But I feel very strongly too that parents don't want choice, that this is a complete sort of blind alley. They don't want foundation schools, they don't want academies, they don't want selective schools, they want good local schools that their children can go to. It fits with the logic of family life. I mean, I often feel that people setting out education policy are not plugged into the reality of day-to-day family life. How do you get 3 different children to 3 different schools if one wants to go to a language college and one wants to do sport and one is very academic? Parents don't want that. They want them to go to the same school close to home.
Lord Lucas, you give parents advice, as it were, on how to work their way around the system. That must chime very much with the sort of things that parents say to you?
Well, we see the parents who are really keen on making a choice, who really want to differentiate, who want to choose the school that's right for their child. And it's an enormous force for good. It's a great fundamental wish to do well for your children. The difficulty we've got in this country is the system doesn't harness that power. It's as if we'd never read Adam Smith and you could do well for yourself financially, but that didn't benefit anyone else because the system didn't allow it.
But given the system is as you don't want it to be, and people with resources can use them in the way that we've just heard, do you do your best in your organisation to say, look, these are your options, you've got the money, go for it there or go for it there?
We help people find the school they want to go for. Then the options are really quite simple. I mean, if it's choice by geography, you go along to your local estate agent and you say, where do I buy to get into this school?
Bev Feather, do you come across this kind of thing?
We check once the LEA tells families that their child has got a place. It's my secretary and myself that actually have to confirm that the people really live where they live. So they have to bring in their documents. We've got good circles of communication in the community. People will rat on people who are cheating. So that's always helpful, but we have to confirm they are. I've been around to flats, looked through letterboxes, seen that they...
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You as head teacher, you go down streets looking in letterboxes to see whether or not it's just piles of brochures in there or whether people are living there?
Yeah. We look at the utility bills. One family had a quarterly electricity bill of only 10 months, so we say, you're busted, you're not having a place at the school.
Fiona Miller, it was not meant to be like this, was it?
No, it wasn't, but I mean, I think I'm going to say something shocking now and agree with Chris, which is that, I mean, we aren't creating enough of the sort of schools. I think we have to distinguish between urban and rural, because a lot of people watch this and think, well, I live in a rural area, this is completely irrelevant, there's one school, we all go to it. We haven't created enough of the sort of schools that most parents want, and Hilary is right, that parents have a very clear idea of the sort of school they want. And it is a local school, and it's a school where their children can progress, where they're happy, where they make progress, and one that has a balanced intake. There is no doubt about that. The herd instinct is very powerful too, but one reason for getting rid of all these forms of selection is to try and create, whether you do it by banding or whatever, good community schools that everybody feels confident to send their children to. It's also about leadership and it's about teaching and lots of other things that go on within schools rather than between them. But I think unless we get back to that idea of, I mean, uniformity has become a sort of dirty word, but, you know, why can't we have uniformly good for everybody? And just, I mean, while you were quoting Andrew Adonis, I was thinking of an interview I heard with him on the radio and he was talking about Michael's school. And he said, this school is a great success because we've got 800 or 1,000 parents applying from 180 places. Now, to me, that's a system that's failing. If you're letting down 600 or 700 parents can't get into their school of choice, and the amount of stress that goes into that, we obviously aren't getting it right, and we need to be looking at making every school as good and as popular as Michael's is, and has all the constituents of what a good local school is for most parents.
Chris Allbred, what do you make of what we've just been hearing?
Well, what emerges very clearly from the last few minutes' discussion is the real problem that so many parents are facing. It's the problem that Fiona's just spoken about, that I mentioned earlier, the excess of demand over supply. The issue then becomes, well, how do we get more good schools? The one view is the top-down, politically driven, bureaucratically managed solution, and that is, of course, what's behind the admissions criteria, the belief that if the misery is spread, if every school is forced to have pupils from different social backgrounds, then every school is going to be equally good. I don't believe that. I believe that good schools are driven by men and women who've got inspiration, who are powerful leaders, and who've got the autonomy to create the institutions that they really want. And essential to autonomy is deciding which students fit your particular vision of the school, which may be comprehensive, may be selective.
Chris Waterman, I knew you wanted in.
You cannot let the market run society in that way, I don't think. Because what you're suggesting, what Baroness Perry's suggesting, is a free market where schools are around hawking their wares, and what happens to the children whose parents are less motivated? Do we say, if you've got less motivated parents, we forget you?
No, we don't. And what really worries me about what you just said is the paternalistic assumption that less well-off parents are less interested in their children's welfare, which in my experience isn't true at all. It's not just the middle class.
You said less motivated, I think was the term you used.
Yeah, well, what you mean is parents who are not middle-class players of the system. Well, I have met, and I'm sure Fiona would agree with this too, working-class mums and dads after working-class mums and dads who are desperate about their children's education.
And I live with two of them, so I don't think you can
two
argue
working-class
that.
mums?
No, sorry, no, one of each. I had a mum and a dad, actually. Right. But it is the working class are always disadvantaged because the middle class find a way to work every system to their own advantage.
I'm going to bring in Anne West, your thought about the whole picture and against that background.
I have a very major concern with schools choosing who is admitted to the school. And I think that's a real problem if one's wanting to create a system where all the schools are perceived to be good schools.
Do you have a problem with the consequences of the present system, which is that people buy their way into the schools they want to go to?
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a real problem.
But do you have a way out of it?
I think the way out of it is to have more high-quality schools, or perceived to be high-quality schools, that more parents are happy with. So I think that that's what's needed. I don't think going down the selective route, as Chris is proposing, is the way to do it. The evidence suggests that parents do want good, high-quality community schools. They don't necessarily want faith schools, they don't necessarily want academies, but they do want schools that they are comfortable with their children going to and that are part of that community.
Pauline Perry.
Yes, I mean, I feel deeply distressed that you think that I'm arguing on the same side as Chris Woodhead, because I disagree profoundly with his proposal for selective grammar schools and the rest non-selective. What I'm saying is I want every school to have the opportunity to offer something different and for parents to choose the kind of school which is right for them. And I also disagree very strongly with the idea that parents don't want choice. I mean, if you are living in a sink estate, in a council flat, then you have no choice. I mean, the only choice that we're offering parents at the moment is between good schools and bad schools. And if you have a catchment area in a very poor area and your only school in that catchment area happens to be very unsatisfactory, you don't have a choice. What I want is to see those parents having a choice. They can't afford to do what you did and move 100 miles away. They're stuck in their council flat. That's the only hope they have for the rest of their lives and their children's lives, to live there. And I want those schools to be driven to be good and to be better. And you can only have that if you have a fair competition between all schools, where parents can genuinely choose outside their catchment area for a good school. So the bad school either gets better or closes, and the good schools can expand.
Canon Hall, final thought we've seen what happens, and it must be quite disconcerting for someone who would like moral and spiritual and educational values to prevail over material inevitability.
Yeah, we see a great diversity of schools, and we certainly think parents ought to be able to choose the sort of school that suits their children, so that there shouldn't be uniform schools, there should be diversity of schools. One of the things that we're very interested in is what the government is proposing about the poorer people having access to 2 or 3 schools within a 6-mile radius, and we've put pressure on them to look into rural areas and choice of denominational schools up to 15 miles if there isn't one closer to them, so that choice for the less advantaged parents is extended.
And faith schools are the answer.
Faith schools are immensely popular, and we're expanding the number of church secondary schools, and we're delighted to be doing that. And it's in response to parental demand. And the more we have, the more we shall be able to let everyone into.
We could continue this, but we can't because we have to stop. At the start of the programme, I quoted the government's intentions. Here they are. No child should be disadvantaged by unfair admissions practice and criteria, and every parent should know the basis on which their child will be admitted to a school. I hope we've at least made things a little clearer. Until the next big debate, goodbye.